Hi, everyone. Today, I will be going over how to unlock inspiration by training AI models for mood boarding. For example, how do you use an image like this, or these sets of images like this that might form the basis of your mood board, and train an AI model so that you can generate images like this, where, as you can see, it's kind of a mix of what you had created in the first place. A little bit about me. My name is Vedi, and growing up, I've always had an interest in photography and crafts and creating things, and that led me to study AI ML and product design at Stanford, where I've always been very interested in the intersection of those two. And so that led me to places like Microsoft, where I explored more of the technological side, Emilio Pucci in Florence, where I explored a little bit more of the creative side, and then Adobe, where I was like, hey, this has got to be the mix of the two, right? And now I am at Facet. We are a startup based in San Francisco, and our mission has always been around connecting the world through visual storytelling, and in particular through making the latest in technology available to creatives. So initially, when we set out to do that, we did that through Facet Edit, where we thought to ourselves, what if the process of editing imagery was where you could talk to an image rather than editing pixels? Like, as you can see here, what if you could just say, like, change the color of her shirt rather than like, let me manually mask out every single pixel here and then create another layer and just do all these steps that aren't really necessary anymore. And then over the past year or so, there's been this explosion in the AI image generation space. And so since then, Facet has expanded to a whole set of tools that have been more focused on AI image generation. So this explosion, it's kind of wild, right? Like, now you can create images like this with just a few words, right? Via this thing that people are calling prompting. And what's been really interesting since all of this has come out in like the past, couple of months, is the quality of the imagery has gone up dramatically. And also the way to access these tools has also become a lot more feasible. So what that kind of means is that leads to a lot more ways in which we can visually communicate with ourselves, with the world, and ultimately that means exciting new applications in the creative space. This application area is the area that I am personally very interested in, because there's been so many times when I've talked to people when I'm doing user testing at work and I'm trying to introduce them to the world of AI image generation. And the question I always get is, okay, like, I can create a pretty image, like, so what? Like, what do I actually do with this? And today I wanted to chat about one of my favorite applications of image generation, which is around the mood boarding space. Mood boarding, as we know, is a task that pretty much every designer has to do, right? Like, whether you're creating an interior design for your own space, or you have a client and they want you to mock up something, in order to really understand, like, what is my color scheme? What textures do I want to use? How do these materials come across? What is the vibe of this? And be able to communicate that not just with yourself, but with other people. You have some way of putting together these visuals. What do you do next, though? Right? Like, you have this mood board, and then you need to combine those concepts together in some way to actually then portray what the combination of those look like. Currently, you kind of end up with this blank canvas problem where even though you have this mood board of all of these ideas, you kind of look like these people who are like, okay, well, how do I combine these? Especially for folks like me who have always been really interested in the creative fields, but don't necessarily have the technical chops for drawing or know the ins and outs of Photoshop. Like, that next step has always been really, really intimidating for me. But now with AI, this next step becomes a lot more feasible. So to really illustrate how this next step has changed, I'm going to walk us through an example where we're going to pretend that we are all game designers. And we've been given the script by one of our directors for a new concept for a video game about this time traveler who discovers this chrono cube, which essentially transports them across multiple eras and timelines where they have to solve puzzles and engage in just different adventures across different space and time and all of that. So how do you proceed with this now that you have access to this technology? Well, so let's say your first step is you curated this mood board, which hopefully you guys can see this, but it's essentially, like, this part is the same, right? It's essentially a collection of, like, ooh, I like this set of imagery, and these are the colors that I really like, and et cetera, et cetera. But now you also have access to Facet Refine, where what you can do is you can upload your images. So these mood boards can just upload them. And then once they're done uploading, you can start tagging them with certain concepts. Like, let's say for let's say you want to tag something as like multiple dimensions, because this is how you yourself conceptualize that, or with other things like balance or ancient or futuristic. After you're done kind of labeling all of that. Oh, yes. Yeah. So here's slightly more zoomed version, where as you can see, there's these images here that I've labeled as futuristic. There's these other ones that are ancient because, it's a time traveler game. You need to have something with the different eras and all of that. And then once you're done uploading your images and adding the tags, what you can do is you just click train over here. And in a few minutes, you have this AI model that you generated, which has all this knowledge of when you're prompting for an image. When you say ancient, it already knows what you mean by ancient. And when you say like action, futuristic, adventure, it already knows what your personal concept of that means. It's not like a generic AI model out there where it's kind of trained on images across the entire internet, right? So like when you say ancient, it might not think that that's what ancient means to it. So this is where training an AI model on this becomes so much more effective. So going back to our storyline a little bit, which is about a young time traveler in a futuristic space. So maybe to start combining some of these elements, you type in futuristic landscape. And what that does is it triggers It triggers the tags that you used to train the AI model, and it'll bring those up in the images that you end up generating. Does take a second, but you can keep hitting generate as many times as you want, and you can keep adding to your prompt. So let's say you want to do multiple landscapes or futuristic landscapes in multiple dimensions. See what that might look like. Hopefully this is working. Okay. So I'm going to go to this other tab where I generated these the other day. Okay, so futuristic landscape, it could generate images like these, where you can see some of the geometries that you used in your original mood board and the colors, they're all showing up. Then when you add futuristic landscape showing multiple dimensions, it has that double exposure effect, which you use to train your model, because that's what your concept of multiple dimensions is. And then maybe you're in space. You can just add that and you instantly have a visual of that. Or like maybe this character happens to be in the Victorian era. You can keep adding and you can keep iterating. Ancient architecture in the distance. Like that's literally like 5 or 6 different concepts that you had in your mood board, all visualized in one space. Can you imagine if you had to manually combine those concepts, how long that would take you? And then imagine if your creative director was like, and give me 5 variations. That's just 5 times the amount of work, right? But here, you can generate those ideas instantly, and you have these visuals that combine that very, very quickly. So now you can spend your time on the actual fun part of creation, which is like perfecting your vision rather than trying to get yourself into a state where what you have in your head, you're just trying to get onto some kind of screen or paper just to communicate it with someone else. So let's take this a step further where let's say that the director now gives you the first scene of your story where you're essentially in a dimly lit underground chamber in a futuristic space where there's ancient carvings on the wall. There's a pedestal in the center of the chamber holding this cube that is just radiating energy. And there's all these electrical cacklings that, like, as the character approaches it, something happens. In this one scene alone, there are so many things that you as a game designer have to conceptualize and visualize. There is, what does this cave look like? What are the different angles that you shoot this cave? Where are the light sources? What do you want? Warm light? Do you want cool light? What does this cube look like? How do you visualize that it's radiating energy? All of these things that even just one of those individually might take you hours, not days, in order to do. But luckily for us, we have our handy dandy AI model where, let's say you start typing in like dimly lit underground cave, and you have visuals of that appearing like almost instantly. And then let's say that you add in like in a futuristic world, and then you add in like an ancient cube that has that blinding light in this cave. that's representing fantasy and all of that. Just look at how many variations of this cube we have just generated here. Like you could have a blue cube with these, doesn't zoom super well, but you could have like this blue cube with all of these lights intertwined in it. Maybe it's just like this thing in the distance that it's so bright you can't even see it. Maybe it's like warmly lit. Maybe it's indicating that there's something outside. But what you can do is now you have options around like, oh, this is actually what I think would make more sense. And I want to generate things that are more like this and lean more into a certain concept where you can generate variations almost immediately. And let's say you want to add the time traveler that's approaching this cube. Like, what might that look like? What are the angles that you use to visualize that person? More cube options. And then let's say in the next scene that you're given, the character is then transported to a different space, such as they're in ancient Egypt for whatever reason. And essentially, you can keep iterating on your story and your concept, and you can literally just add your script into this and have visuals instantly. You could even take it a step further in Facet Create, which is an infinite canvas version of Facet Refine, where you can plot your visualizations side by side, and you can literally just mood board your entire story here. So there is a character, a time traveler, approaching in a cave who's on a mission. He sees this cube. Time traveler approaches cube. They're transported somewhere. They show up in this mystical world of Egypt, and then they start exploring that. They get closer and they discover a civilization. As they keep walking, there's a market and a society that they enter upon. There's maybe they start talking to the people there. They have some conversations. They keep walking, and there's this mysterious tomb that they enter in with more glowing lights that now has a maze with all of these things that are further clues in your video game. But here's a mood board or like a visualization of one concept of what your game could look like. And if you click this button over here, you can actually just share this with your collaborators, and they can co-create with you in the same space. So to reiterate, we just went from step 1 of curating a mood board to step 2 of visualizing or of visually conceptualizing the story in a very, very short amount of time. Like to me, that's kind of mind-blowing, right? In some ways it's scary, but it is also, it's so insanely useful, right? Like now you can spend all your time but on like the fun creative parts of really fine-tuning what your vision actually is, rather than like, oh, I don't know how to draw a cube, which hopefully you know how to draw a cube, but you don't need to. And more broadly, the part that I'm really excited about and that I'd love to have a discussion about at some point is what opportunities are unlocked for us as a society when things like visual communication are easier and more accessible, when it's easier to really understand what someone else is thinking, when it's easier to collaborate. What else could we do with the time that we've been given back? So with that, thank you. And if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, it's just a free form text. Let me show you some more examples. So this is the artist partner that we worked with who, like, she had a very different use case where she essentially had two different styles of photography, where one was very holographic and iridescent and the other was like smooth gradients and very photorealistic. And she just wanted to see what that would be in real life or what that would look like combined. And then she labeled them however she wanted, and she was able to visualize, like, this is what these two mixed together would look like. Essentially, what you can do is you can go into your editor and you can create things like more like this, and you can just generate a lot of variations of a small just like a small scene. And then if you then start downloading those images, and what you have is you have like one time frame in a video or animation. So then if you just put all of those together, that's a way in which you can create animations from your generations here and like start to morph them together and things like that. In Facet Create, you have so many controls around just like how you can modify a certain image or output. Like, let's say you wanted to add different finishes around, like, you wanted to specify different mediums, different lenses, different light sources, and things like that. Facet makes it easier for you to kind of put those building blocks together so that the output that you do generate is a bit more refined to what you had in your mind, and you don't have to worry as much on prompting. We're actually also about to release a new beta that makes all of this a lot more simple. So if you're interested in that, find me afterwards and we can sign you up for it. Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely one that I don't think has been answered yet. Like, I think at the moment, legally speaking, to some degree, it's like your gut feeling, right? Where it's like, does this feel wrong? You know, like in the example that I presented here, the images that I took to train the model, it was from Unsplash, which it is an open website, and its license allows you to use the images however you want, as long as you're not creating like a competing Unsplash project. And if you look at some of the images that were used to actually train this model versus what some of the outputs of these images were, it's so drastically different, and it's been modified so much from both its initial form and its intended use case that in that sense it should fall under fair use. But again, the jury's still out on that. So for now, I've been going off gut feeling. Yeah, so our policies do state that you should have rights over the images that you use to train a model. I mean, to some degree, it is on users' discretion if they're going to do that or not. But like, if you're going to rip someone off, you could do that with existing tools, right? So there's always going to be bad players, and like policy is only going to help with it to some degree. But we do try to warn against, like, just be cautious on the images that you're using to train these models and make sure you have rights over them. I think a lot of that depends on how many concepts you use to train the model. So like, let's say that you had, so like in this instance, we had like 10 different concepts that we were trying to combine together. And so in order for the model to really understand what you mean by that, it needs a lot of examples of that one concept. But if you had fewer concepts, you might not need as many. Like, for example, this is what an artist that we work with, her name's Simone. She's based in London. These were some of her training images on the left and some of the generations on the right. So this one, it's a lot fewer images than the one that I presented, but it's also fewer concepts. So it varies. And here's another one that I thought was kind of neat. It's like combining houses with electrical lights and then seeing like what might a house with those combined look like, which I personally just find this product really fun.